The deafening crack of gunfire shattered the evening calm of Trinidad, Colorado, as Fiona Parker stood frozen at the threshold of her modest homestead, watching helplessly as her husband of 6 years collapsed to the dusty ground. The year was 1875, and in a single heartbeat, Fiona became another widow in a land where death rode as freely as the wind across the plains. 2 months later, the late August sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth as Fiona wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. At 26, she had never imagined facing life alone, especially not in this unforgiving territory. The small ranch she and Thomas had built together now felt like a burden too heavy to bear. The cattle needed tending, the fences mending, and the 100 other tasks that had once been divided between them now fell squarely on her slender shoulders. "Madam, you ought to consider selling," the banker, Mr. Wilkins, had suggested just yesterday, his eyes already calculating the profit he might make from her misfortune. "A woman alone has no business trying to run a ranch." His words still rang in her ears as she struggled to repair the chicken coop. The hammer slipped from her grip, striking her thumb. Fiona bit back a curse, tears springing to her eyes not from the pain, but from the overwhelming frustration of it all. "Need a hand with that." The deep voice startled her. Fiona spun around, instinctively reaching for the revolver Thomas had taught her to use, tucked in the pocket of her apron. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the setting sun. As he stepped forward, his features became clearer weathered skin tanned by years under the harsh western sun, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a stance that spoke of confidence earned through hardship. "Didn't mean to frighten you, madam." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Name's Caleb Xavier. I'm passing through looking for work." Fiona eyed him suspiciously, her hand still hovering near her weapon. Trinidad might be growing with the railroad's expansion, but strangers were still assessed carefully, especially by a woman alone. "I don't have money to hire help, Mr. Xavier," she replied stiffly, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I'd appreciate you moving along before nightfall." The stranger Caleb didn't seem offended by her dismissal. Instead, he glanced around the property with a practiced eye. "Your north fence line is down," he observed, "and that barn roof won't last another winter." He placed his hat back on his head. "I'm not asking for money, madam. Just a meal and a place to sleep in your barn for a few days while I earn my keep." Fiona hesitated. Pride told her to send him away, but practicality whispered that she was drowning in work that required a man's strength. Thomas would have called her foolish for even considering it. "Why would you work for just meals?" she asked warily. A shadow crossed his face. "Been riding hard for a while. Sometimes a man needs to stop, catch his breath, do something useful with his hands." He offered a small, tentative smile that softened the hard edges of his face. "I give you my word I'll cause no trouble." Something in his eyes, a familiar weariness she recognized from her own reflection, made her nod slowly. "1 week," she conceded. "Then we'll reassess." "Fair enough," he agreed, already rolling up his sleeves. Without another word, he took the hammer from her hand and began repairing the chicken coop with quick, efficient movements. As dusk fell, Fiona watched from the kitchen window as the stranger expertly completed the task that would have taken her hours. Her suspicious nature battled with desperate relief. She didn't trust him, couldn't afford to, but she needed the help. God knew she needed it. That evening, they ate a simple supper of beans and cornbread in awkward silence. Caleb attempted small talk, but Fiona answered in clipped sentences, maintaining a careful distance. After the meal, she showed him to the barn, providing a blanket and pillow. "I've slept in worse conditions," he assured her, seeming to sense her discomfort at having a man on her property. "I'll be up at dawn to start on that fence." True to his word, when Fiona rose the next morning, Caleb was already at work. She observed him from the kitchen as she prepared breakfast, noting the methodical way he approached each task, the respect with which he handled Thomas's tools. By midday, he had repaired half the fallen fence line. Fiona brought him water and a sandwich, standing at a distance as he took a short break. "You've done this work before," she commented, not a question but an observation. Caleb wiped his brow, nodding. Had my own spread once, up in Wyoming territory. What happened to it? She asked before she could stop herself. His jaw tightened momentarily. Lost it. Bad investments, worse drought. He took another sip of water. Life has a way of taking what you think is yours to keep. The raw honesty in his voice struck a chord within her. Yes, she whispered. It certainly does. For the first time since Thomas's death, Fiona felt a flicker of connection with another person who understood loss without pitying her for it. Over the next few days, a tentative routine emerged. Caleb worked from sunrise to sunset, making repairs that had been neglected for months. Fiona continued her duties cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, and caring for the few animals that remained. They spoke little, but the silence gradually became more comfortable. On the fourth evening, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the plains. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rain lashing against the windows with frightening force. Fiona paced nervously, jumping at each thunderclap. The barn where Caleb slept was old, its roof patched in places. A particularly vicious gust rattled the house, and before she could reconsider, Fiona grabbed a lantern and a spare blanket, throwing a shawl over her nightdress. Fighting against the wind, she made her way to the barn, nearly losing her footing in the mud several times. She found Caleb attempting to calm the agitated horses, water pouring through a new leak in the roof directly over where he had been sleeping. "Mr. Xavier," she called over the storm's roar. "You can't stay here tonight," he turned, surprise evident on his face. "I'm fine, Mrs. Parker. Just need to move my bedroll." Another crack of thunder sent one of the horses rearing. As Caleb moved to steady the animal, Fiona made a decision that would have scandalized the good people of Trinidad. "The house has a spare room," she shouted, "just for tonight." "This is foolishness in such weather." Hesitation crossed his features. "That wouldn't be proper, neither is pneumonia," she cut him off. "Gather your things. Quickly." Inside the house, Fiona showed him to the small room that had once been intended for the children she and Thomas had hoped for. It contained only a simple bed and dresser, untouched for months. "I appreciate this, Mrs. Parker," Caleb said, standing awkwardly in the doorway, dripping water onto the floorboards. "There are dry clothes in the dresser," she said stiffly. "They were my husband's. They might be a bit small for you, but they're clean and dry." Before he could respond, she retreated to her room, closing the door firmly behind her. Her heart hammered in her chest, partly from the exertion and partly from the strange intimacy of having a man under her roof again. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door, listening to the distant sounds of movement in the guest room. What would people say if they knew? A widow housing a drifter, a man she knew nothing about beyond his name and the work of his hands. But as the storm raged outside, Fiona found she cared less about propriety than she had in weeks. There was something freeing in making decisions based solely on what felt right, rather than what others might think. Morning brought clear skies and an awkward breakfast. Caleb had risen early again, but instead of heading straight to work, he waited for her to join him at the table. "Thank you for your hospitality last night," he said formally. "I can move back to the barn today." Fiona stirred her coffee, avoiding his gaze. "The roof still needs repair. You'd best stay in the house until it's fixed." She spoke matter-of-factly, as if the arrangement was purely practical. "There's plenty of room, and it makes no sense for you to sleep in the wet." If Caleb was surprised by her decision, he didn't show it. He simply nodded, finishing his breakfast in silence before heading out to assess the storm damage. The next few days established a new rhythm. Caleb continued his work during daylight hours, while Fiona maintained a careful distance, but the evening meals gradually became less strained. She found herself asking questions about his travels, his life before Wyoming. He answered openly, though she sensed there were parts of his story he omitted. In turn, he inquired about her life in Trinidad, how she had come to settle there with her husband. Fiona surprised herself by sharing memories of Thomas she had kept locked away, their journey west from Missouri, their dreams for the ranch, the way he could make her laugh even in the hardest times. "He sounds like he was a good man," Caleb commented one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "He was," Fiona agreed softly. "He didn't deserve to die like that, shot down by cowards in a petty dispute over water rights." Bitterness crept into her voice. The law did nothing, said there wasn't enough evidence to convict anyone. Caleb's expression darkened. Justice is sometimes hard to find out here. Justice? Fiona gave a hollow laugh. I gave up on that months ago, now I just want to survive. She ran her fingers over the worn wood of the porch railing. But some days I'm not sure why I'm fighting so hard to keep this place. Thomas is gone, we have no children, what am I preserving it for? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered but acknowledged. As darkness fell, they retreated to their separate rooms, both lost in thoughts of what had been lost and what might still be salvaged from the ruins. The following Sunday, Fiona dressed for church as she had every week since Thomas's death. The ritual provided structure to her grief, even if her faith felt hollow now. Will you join me? She asked Caleb as she adjusted her bonnet in the small mirror by the door. He shook his head, discomfort evident in his posture. I haven't set foot in a church in many years, Mrs. Parker. I doubt the good Lord would welcome me now. Fiona studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders. Well, the invitation stands if you change your mind. The church service was like all the others, familiar hymns, scripture readings, and Pastor Miller's sermon about faith in difficult times. Fiona sat in her usual pew, nodding politely to neighbors while maintaining the emotional distance she'd cultivated since becoming a widow. Afterwards, several women approached her, curiosity barely concealed beneath their expressions of concern. Fiona, dear Mrs. Abernathy began, her voice lowered conspiratorially. Is it true you've taken in a drifter? Sarah Watson was riding past your property and saw a man working your fences. Fiona straightened her spine. Mr. Xavier is helping with some repairs in exchange for room and board. It's a temporary arrangement. Mrs. Abernathy exchanged glances with the other women. Well, we're just concerned for your reputation, dear. A young widow living alone with a stranger people will talk. People always talk, Mrs. Abernathy, Fiona replied coolly. And I find I have more pressing concerns than their opinions. The woman's mouth tightened in disapproval. Your husband has been gone barely 2 months. What would Thomas think of such an arrangement? Something snapped inside Fiona. Thomas would think that a leaking roof needs fixing and fences need mending and cattle need tending, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He'd think that surviving matters more than appearances. Good day, ladies. She left the church with her head high, though her hands trembled slightly as she untied her horse from the hitching post. The encounter left her shaken, not because she cared what the townspeople thought, but because Mrs. Abernathy had voiced the doubts that sometimes whispered in her own mind late at night. When she returned home, she found Caleb in the barn, fashioning new handles for some of the older tools. He looked up as she entered, his expression questioning when he saw her troubled face. Church didn't provide much comfort today, he asked gently. Fiona removed her gloves with sharp, agitated movements. The church was fine. It's the people who attend it that can be difficult. She hesitated before adding, they've noticed you're staying here. They're concerned about my reputation. Caleb set down his work, wiping his hands on a rag. I can leave if that would make things easier for you. No, she said quickly, too quickly perhaps. She moderated her tone. No, that's not necessary. The work isn't finished and I've grown accustomed to having someone to talk with in the evenings. A small smile tugged at his lips. As have I, Mrs. Parker. Fiona, she said impulsively. If you're going to continue staying in my home, you might as well use my given name. Something shifted in his eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Fiona, he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. Then I insist you call me Caleb. The simple exchange of names felt more intimate than it should have. Fiona nodded, suddenly self-conscious, and retreated to the house to change out of her church clothes. That evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew Caleb had prepared, he had proven to be a surprisingly competent cook. Fiona found herself observing him more carefully. The way his hands, rough from work but gentle in movement, broke apart a piece of bread. The occasional smile that transformed his serious face. The respectful way he listened when she spoke as if her words mattered. Tell me more about your life before, she said suddenly. You've mentioned Wyoming, but nothing before that. Caleb's expression grew guarded. He took a slow sip of water before answering. Not much to tell that would interest you. Born in Ohio, left home young, drifted west like many others, seeking something better. And did you find it? Something better, he met her eyes across the table. For a time, Wyoming was good to me for a few years, built something I was proud of. A shadow crossed his face. Then came the troubles. What kind of troubles? Fiona pressed gently. Caleb hesitated, setting down his spoon. The kind that follow a man who once rode with the wrong crowd. He watched her carefully, gauging her reaction. I wasn't always the man you see before you, Fiona. Made mistakes in my youth that I've spent years trying to outrun. A chill ran down Fiona's spine. You were an outlaw. For a time, he admitted, his voice low. Never killed anyone who didn't draw on me first, if that matters. But yes, I rode with a gang in my younger days, robbed a few stagecoaches, rustled cattle. He gave a humorless laugh. Thought I was living free until I realized I'd just built myself a different kind of cage. Fiona's mind raced. She should feel afraid, she knew, should ask him to leave immediately, yet something in his candor and the regret evident in his eyes kept her seated. What changed? She asked. Met a man who gave me a chance I didn't deserve, offered me work on his ranch, treated me like I could be something other than what I'd been. Caleb's expression softened at the memory. He taught me ranching, helped me save enough to buy my own land eventually, and the men you rode with. They just let you leave, Caleb's jaw tightened. No, they came looking for me years later when they heard I'd made something of myself, burned me out, shot my cattle. His hands clenched into fists on the table. That's the trouble that found me in Wyoming. The past has a way of catching up, no matter how far you run. Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of his confession. Fiona studied him, seeing both the man he was now and shadows of the one he'd been. Why tell me this? She finally asked. You must know it would change how I see you. Because you deserve the truth, he answered simply. And because, he hesitated, because I respect you too much to build whatever this is between us on lies. The acknowledgement that there was something between them, undefined but undeniably present, hung in the air. Fiona felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away from his steady gaze. I appreciate your honesty, she said at last. We all have pasts we're not proud of, though mine might be less colorful than yours. She offered a small smile. For what it's worth, I believe people can change. The man who's been helping me these past weeks is not the same one who rode with outlaws. Relief washed over Caleb's face. Thank you for that. That night, as Fiona lay in bed listening to the distant coyotes, she pondered the strange turn her life had taken. 2 months ago, she had been a respectable married woman with a clear path ahead. Now she was a widow harboring a reformed outlaw, feeling things she had no business feeling for a man who wasn't her husband. Thomas's memory seemed both vivid and faded simultaneously. She could recall perfectly the sound of his laugh, the feel of his hand in hers. Yet somehow those memories had taken on the quality of a story told about someone else's life. Her grief remained, but it had changed shape, become something she carried rather than something that consumed her. Sleep eluded her for hours as she wrestled with conflicting emotions, loyalty to Thomas's memory, concern about what the townspeople might think, and the growing warmth she felt in Caleb's presence. When exhaustion finally claimed her, her dreams were a confused tangle of past and present, Thomas's face blending with Caleb's in unsettling ways. The next morning brought word from town that outlaws had robbed the stage 10 miles outside of Trinidad. Sheriff Miller rode out to inform isolated homesteads to be on alert. They made off with the bank payroll, he told Fiona and Caleb, who stood together on the porch. The sheriff's eyes lingered on Caleb with suspicion. Don't believe I've made your acquaintance, mister. Caleb Xavier, he replied evenly. I'm working for Mrs. Parker. Sheriff Miller nodded slowly, his expression making it clear he'd heard the gossip. Where you from, Xavier? All over, Caleb answered, maintaining eye contact with the lawman. Most recently Wyoming territory. Wyoming, huh? Got some wanted posters from up that way. Any reason I might recognize your face if I check them? Fiona felt tension radiating from Caleb beside her, though his expression remained calm. That was a long time ago, Sheriff. I've been on the right side of the law for many years now. The sheriff's hand moved closer to his holster. So there is a reason. Fiona stepped forward. Sheriff Miller, Mr. Xavier has been helping me maintain this ranch for weeks now. He's been nothing but respectful and hardworking. Whatever he might have done in the past has no bearing on who he is today. Miller's eyes flicked between them. Mrs. Parker, with all due respect, you're a widow alone on an isolated property. You can't afford to be naive about the company you keep. I'm quite capable of judging character, she replied stiffly, and I would appreciate it if you'd extend to me the courtesy of respecting my decisions regarding my own home. The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue further, but instead tipped his hat reluctantly. As you wish, madam. But I'll be keeping an eye on things out this way. He turned his horse. Remember to bolt your doors at night. These outlaws are dangerous men. As the sheriff rode away, Fiona became aware of how close she was standing to Caleb, how naturally she had defended him. She stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. Not many would stand up for a man with my history. Was he right to be suspicious? She asked directly. Do you know the men who robbed the stage? Caleb shook his head firmly. No, that life is long behind me. He hesitated. But the sheriff is right about one thing. You should be careful about the company you keep. My presence here might be bringing you more trouble than help. Fiona met his gaze steadily. I believe I've made my position on that clear, both to Sheriff Miller and to you. Unless you're planning to rob me in my sleep, I'm content with our arrangement. A smile ghosted across his face. No, madam, robbing you is definitely not what I've been thinking about. The loaded statement hung between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks and turned quickly toward the house. I should start dinner. It'll be dark soon. That night, a storm of a different kind rolled across the plains, one made not of rain and thunder, but of hoofbeats and men's shouts. Fiona woke to the sound of glass breaking, followed by Caleb's urgent voice at her bedroom door. Fiona, get up. Riders coming in fast, at least 5 of them. She scrambled from bed, heart pounding as she pulled on a robe over her nightdress. Caleb handed her the revolver from the kitchen drawer. Stay back from the windows, he instructed, his own gun already drawn. Could be the stage robbers looking for a place to lie low. Before she could respond, a voice called from outside. Caleb Xavier, we know you're in there. Come on out, and maybe we won't burn the widow woman's house down around her. Caleb's face went pale in the dim lamplight. Blake, he whispered. God, no. You know them? Fiona asked, fear clawing at her throat. From Wyoming, he confirmed grimly. The past catching up, just like I warned you it might. He moved toward the door. I need to go out there. If I don't, they'll make good on their threat. Fiona grabbed his arm. You can't, they'll kill you. Better me than both of us, he said, gently removing her hand. Listen to me, Fiona. Once I'm out there, take the rifle from under my bed and position yourself upstairs. If things go bad, you'll have a better vantage point to defend yourself. No, she said firmly, surprising herself with her resolve. This is my home. I won't hide while you face them alone. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but another shout from outside cut him off. Last chance, Xavier, or we start shooting. Stay behind me, he ordered, moving toward the door. Let me do the talking. They stepped onto the porch together, Caleb slightly in front of Fiona, both with weapons ready but pointed downward. In the yard, 5 riders sat on horseback, silhouetted against the moonlit landscape. The man in front, tall and lean with a distinctive scar across his cheek, grinned wolfishly when he saw Caleb. Well, well, the great reformed outlaw himself, he drawled. Playing house with a widow now, are we? My, how domestic you've become. What do you want, Blake? Caleb asked, his voice controlled despite the tension evident in every line of his body. What's rightfully mine, Blake replied. You remember that last job we pulled before you got religion, that army payroll, you took your share and disappeared. His voice hardened. Except it wasn't just your share you took, was it, partner? Fiona glanced at Caleb, whose expression remained impassive. That was 15 years ago, Caleb said evenly. And you know damn well why I took extra. You left Mason to die, shot in the back by your own hand because he wanted out, just like I did. Blake shrugged. Ancient history, but debts don't expire, and you owe me. We've been tracking you since Wyoming, and now it's time to collect. The money, Xavier, all of it plus interest. I don't have it, Caleb replied. Haven't for years. Then I guess we'll have to take something else instead. Blake's eyes shifted to Fiona, a cruel smile playing at his lips. Your widow's mighty pretty. Caleb's gun came up instantly. You touch her, you die. The other men raised their weapons in response, creating a standoff that crackled with deadly potential. Wait, Fiona said, stepping forward despite Caleb's attempt to keep her behind him. What if we could get you the money? Would you leave us in peace? Blake studied her with interest. How much we talking about, widow? Fiona, don't. Caleb warned. She ignored him. How much does he owe you? Blake named a sum that made her eyes widen far more than she had access to, but she didn't let her shock show. The bank in Trinidad, she said steadily. They're expecting a new shipment of cash tomorrow to replace what was stolen in the stage robbery. Give us 2 days and we can get you what you want. Caleb stared at her in disbelief. Blake, however, seemed intrigued. You suggesting you and Caleb rob a bank for me? He laughed. Now that would be poetic justice. I'm suggesting, Fiona continued, her mind racing ahead of her words, that we can get you money if you give us time and agree to leave for good afterwards. Blake considered this, glancing at his companions. 2 days, he finally said. We'll make camp in the hills south of here, if you try to alert the law or if you're not back with my money by sunset on the 2nd day. He let the threat hang unfinished. Understood, Fiona said before Caleb could speak. With a tip of his hat and a mocking smile, Blake turned his horse. 2 days, Xavier. Don't disappoint me again. The riders galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in the moonlight. As soon as they were out of earshot, Caleb rounded on Fiona. Have you lost your mind? We can't rob a bank, and even if we could, you think men like that keep their word. Fiona's temporary bravado crumbled, her hands shaking as the full weight of what had just happened descended on her. I was buying us time, she whispered. Time to think, to plan, to get help. Caleb ran a hand through his hair in frustration. There's no help to be had. Sheriff Miller already suspects me of being an outlaw. If we go to him now, he'll lock me up and leave you unprotected when Blake returns, which he will, with or without money. Then what do we do? Fiona asked, the gravity of their situation setting in. Caleb's expression hardened with resolve. I leave, tonight, draw them away from you. No, the vehemence in her voice surprised them both. They've seen me now, they know about me. Do you really think they'll just leave me alone if you disappear? They'll come back, thinking I know where to find you or the money. The truth of her words hung heavy between them. There was no simple solution, no easy escape from the trap that had sprung around them both. Then we need another plan, Caleb conceded, guiding her back into the house and bolting the door behind them. One that doesn't involve bank robbery or me abandoning you. They sat at the kitchen table until dawn, discussing possibilities, discarding one idea after another. As the first light of morning crept through the windows, Fiona's exhausted mind seized upon a memory, something Thomas had mentioned years ago. Wait, she said, straightening in her chair. Thomas once told me about a cache of gold that was supposedly hidden during the Civil War, somewhere in the caves north of town. The story goes that Confederate sympathizers were moving it to fund their cause when Union soldiers caught up with them. The men hid the gold and died before revealing its location. Caleb looked skeptical. That sounds like a legend, not a plan. Thomas believed it was real, Fiona insisted. He spent months researching it, even had a map he thought might lead to it. Her eyes lit up with sudden hope. The map is still here in his study. What if the gold is real? It would be more than enough to pay Blake. And if it's not real, Caleb asked gently, if it's just a story or if the gold was found long ago, Fiona's shoulders slumped. Then we're no worse off than we are now. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers the first time she had initiated such contact. But we have to try, don't we? It's better than waiting here for them to return. The touch of her hand seemed to decide him. Caleb nodded, squeezing her fingers lightly. Show me this map. Thomas's study was a small room off the main living area, largely untouched since his death. Fiona had found it too painful to sort through his personal effects, so everything remained as he had left it: books on shelves, papers on the desk, his favorite pipe in its stand. With reverent hands, she opened the bottom drawer of his desk, removing a leather portfolio. Inside was a collection of papers, newspaper clippings, and hand-drawn maps, all relating to what Thomas had called the lost Confederate gold of Raton Pass. He was fascinated by the story, Fiona explained as Caleb examined the materials. Spent hours in the territorial archives interviewing old-timers exploring the foothills. She traced a finger over Thomas's handwriting. Most people thought he was chasing fairy tales, but he was convinced it was real. Caleb studied the most detailed map, which showed a series of cave systems in the mountains north of Trinidad. One section was marked with an X and cryptic notations in Thomas's hand. "This is detailed work," he observed. "Your husband was thorough. Too thorough, some would say. He became obsessed with it toward the end." Fiona's voice grew quiet. "I sometimes wondered if the men who killed him knew about his search for the gold, if they thought he had found it." Caleb looked up sharply. "You never mentioned that possibility before." Fiona shook her head. "It's just speculation. The official story was an argument over water rights, but Thomas had no quarrel with anyone that I knew of." She sighed. "Perhaps I'm just looking for meaning in something senseless. Or perhaps your instincts are right," Caleb said thoughtfully. "Either way, this map is our best hope." He rolled it carefully. "We should leave immediately. We've already lost hours, and we have no idea how difficult the terrain might be or how long it will take to locate the exact cave." Fiona nodded, moving quickly to pack provisions, food, water, blankets, lanterns. Caleb readied the horses, selecting Thomas's old gelding for himself and Fiona's mare for her. As the sun rose fully over the eastern plains, they set out northward, the map secured in Caleb's saddlebag. Neither spoke of the danger they were riding toward or the slim chances of success. Hope, fragile as it was, drove them forward into the unknown. The journey to the foothills took several hours of hard riding. As the flat plains gave way to increasingly rugged terrain, Fiona found herself watching Caleb the confident way he sat his horse, the alertness in his posture as he scanned their surroundings, the occasional glance back to ensure she was managing the difficult trail. By midday, they reached the area marked on Thomas's map. Dismounting, they secured the horses near a small stream and continued on foot, the slope too steep and rocky for riding. "According to the map, the main cave entrance should be just beyond that ridge," Caleb said, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. "But be careful, these foothills are unstable in places." As they climbed, Fiona felt a strange mixture of emotions. This quest for hidden gold seemed both desperate and foolish in the light of day, yet she couldn't deny the flicker of excitement beneath her fear. For months, she had simply existed, going through the motions of survival. Now, despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, she felt truly alive again. "There," Caleb pointed to a dark opening in the rock face, partially obscured by brush. "That must be it." They approached cautiously. The cave entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance, easily tall enough for them to enter without stooping. "I'll go first," Caleb said, lighting one of the lanterns they had brought. "Stay close behind me and watch your step. Cave floors can be treacherous." The temperature dropped noticeably as they ventured into the darkness, the lantern light casting eerie shadows on the rough stone walls. The main tunnel extended deep into the mountain, with smaller passages branching off at intervals. "How will we know which way to go?" Fiona whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Caleb consulted the map again. "Thomas marked this junction here, see?" And then left at the next fork. He glanced up at her. "Did he ever tell you more specific details about where the gold might be hidden?" Fiona tried to recall conversations from years ago. "He mentioned something about a chamber with a natural pool. Said the gold was supposedly hidden beneath the water or behind it somehow." They proceeded deeper into the cave system, following Thomas's notations as best they could. The air grew damper, the sound of dripping water a constant companion to their careful footsteps. After nearly an hour of exploration, they reached a larger chamber where several tunnels converged. In the center was a small, still pool of water, its surface black and reflective in the lantern light. "This must be it," Fiona breathed, excitement rising in her chest. The pool Thomas described. Caleb approached the water's edge cautiously, holding the lantern high to illuminate as much of the chamber as possible. "The question is, where exactly would they hide gold in here? Under the water seems unlikely it would be too visible." Fiona scanned the walls, trying to think like Thomas would have. He always said to look for what doesn't belong, she mused. Natural caves have a certain flow to them. Anything man-made would stand out. They began a methodical examination of the chamber, checking for loose rocks, unnatural patterns, anything that might indicate a hiding place. After 30 minutes of fruitless searching, Fiona's initial optimism began to wane. Maybe we're in the wrong chamber, she suggested. Or maybe the gold was already found long ago. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He was studying the pool intently, holding the lantern at different angles. Fiona, he said slowly, look at the reflection in the water. Do you see it? She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing against his as she leaned forward. In the reflection, a pattern on the ceiling became visible, one that wasn't apparent when looking up directly. It's an arrow, she whispered, astonished. Carved into the rock but only visible in reflection. Caleb raised the lantern higher, following the direction the arrow indicated. It pointed to a narrow crevice in the far wall, almost hidden behind a rocky outcropping. Could be nothing, he cautioned, but it's definitely man-made. They moved toward the crevice, which was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Caleb went first, edging sideways into the narrow passage. Fiona followed, her heart pounding with renewed hope. The crevice extended about 15 feet before opening into a small chamber no larger than a storage closet. Caleb held the lantern high, illuminating the space, and there, stacked against the back wall, were several wooden crates. My God, Fiona breathed. Thomas was right. Caleb approached the crates carefully, setting the lantern on a rock shelf. The lid of the topmost box had rotted partially away, revealing the glint of metal within. With careful hands, he pried it open further. Gold coins spilled into view, hundreds of them, tarnished by time but unmistakably valuable. Fiona reached out with trembling fingers, touching one of the coins as if to convince herself it was real. There must be a fortune here, she whispered. More than enough to pay Blake. Caleb nodded, his expression grave despite their discovery. We need to take only what we need, he said firmly. Greed is what got me into trouble years ago. I won't make that mistake again. Fiona agreed, helping him transfer a portion of the coins into the canvas bags they had brought. Even taking just what they estimated would cover Blake's demand, the bags were heavy with wealth. We should mark this place somehow, Fiona suggested as they prepared to leave, so we can find it again if needed. Caleb hesitated. Are you sure that's wise? This gold has remained hidden for over a decade because no one knew exactly where to look. I'm not suggesting we tell anyone, she clarified. But this was Thomas's discovery, even if he never found it himself. It feels wrong to just walk away from it. Understanding softened Caleb's features. All right, we'll mark it, but subtly. Something only we would recognize. Using a small knife, he carved a tiny F inside an equally small C on the rock beside the crevice entrance, small enough to be overlooked by casual explorers, but clear enough for them to find again. The return journey through the caves seemed quicker than their exploration had been. Emerging into the late afternoon sunlight, they blinked against the sudden brightness, the weight of the gold in their saddlebags both literal and metaphorical. We should make camp soon, Caleb suggested as they mounted their horses. It's too risky to travel these paths in darkness, and we still have a full day before our deadline with Blake. They found a sheltered spot near a small stream, far enough from the main trail to avoid casual discovery, but with good visibility of the surrounding area. As Caleb built a small, nearly smokeless fire, Fiona laid out their bedrolls and prepared a simple meal from their provisions. The reality of their situation alone in the wilderness, carrying a fortune in gold, with dangerous men expecting their return, created a strange intimacy between them. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in thought yet acutely aware of each other's presence. What will you do after this is over? Fiona asked eventually, watching the firelight play across Caleb's features. Assuming Blake keeps his word and leaves us be, Caleb poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. I hadn't thought that far ahead, he admitted. Been living day to day for so long, it's hard to imagine anything else. You could stay, Fiona said, the words escaping before she could reconsider them. At the ranch, I mean, the work suits you and I've grown accustomed to having you there. He looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Is that what you want, Fiona? For me to stay as your ranch hand? The question carried layers of meaning, asking for clarification of feelings neither had openly acknowledged. Fiona found herself at a crossroads: retreat into the safety of propriety or step forward into something new and uncertain. No, she said softly, holding his gaze. Not just as my ranch hand. The admission hung in the air between them. Caleb set aside the stick and moved around the fire to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cooling night air. I've tried to keep my distance, he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. Told myself you needed time to grieve, that you deserved better than a man with my past. But God help me, Fiona, I don't want to leave when this is over. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through her, awakening feelings she had thought might be forever dormant after Thomas's death. I still miss him, she confessed, needing honesty between them. I think a part of me always will. I would never ask you to forget him, Caleb assured her. Your love for Thomas is part of who you are. I wouldn't change that. His understanding, so different from the jealousy she might have expected, moved her deeply. Without conscious thought, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them until their foreheads touched. I'm afraid, she whispered. Not of you, but of feeling this way again, of losing someone else I care for. Caleb raised his free hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as a prayer. I can't promise nothing will happen to me, Fiona. Life offers no guarantees, as we both know too well. But I can promise that for however long we have, I will do everything in my power to bring you joy rather than sorrow. The simple vow, spoken beneath the vast canopy of stars, broke something open inside her, a dam of grief and loneliness she had built to protect herself. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were not entirely tears of sadness. Caleb brushed them away with his thumb, his own eyes suspiciously bright in the firelight. Then, with infinite gentleness, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Fiona answered by sliding her hands up to his shoulders, drawing him closer as the contact deepened. Heat bloomed between them, months of unacknowledged attraction crystallizing into this single point of connection. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers again. I've wanted to do that since the first week, he admitted with a small smile. Even when I was being stubborn and suspicious, she asked, her own lips curving upward, especially then. Your spirit is what drew me to you from the beginning, your determination to survive no matter what life threw at you. They stayed by the fire late into the night, talking softly, sharing pieces of themselves they had kept hidden. Caleb spoke of his childhood in Ohio, the father whose approval he never earned, the wrong turns that led him into outlaw life. Fiona told him about meeting Thomas, their difficult journey west, the children they had hoped for but never conceived. When they finally settled into their bedrolls, placed closer together than they might have been the night before, Fiona felt a curious peace despite the danger still ahead. Whatever happened with Blake and his men, something precious had been acknowledged between her and Caleb, something worth fighting to protect. Dawn broke clear and cold, rousing them from fitful sleep. They ate quickly, packed their belongings, and set off toward the rendezvous point Blake had indicated. The gold weighed heavily in their saddlebags, a burden and a hope simultaneously. We need to be smart about this, Caleb said as they rode. Blake isn't known for keeping his word, and 5 against 2 aren't odds I like. What do you suggest? Fiona asked, trusting his experience with such men. We find a location that gives us some advantage, higher ground, good cover, multiple escape routes. We show them the gold but keep it secured to our horses, and we make it clear that the only way they get it is by riding away and leaving us in peace. Fiona nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The romantic interlude by the fire seemed distant now, replaced by the harsh reality of their situation. They reached the hills south of the ranch by midday, carefully scouting the area for signs of Blake and his men. Eventually, they they spotted smoke from a small campfire in a sheltered ravine. "There they are," Caleb murmured, surveying the camp through Thomas's old field glasses. "All 5 of them, looks like." They selected their approach carefully, a ridge that offered a clear view of the camp but provided some cover and a good position for negotiation. As they drew closer, Caleb reached across to touch Fiona's arm. "Whatever happens," he said, his expression serious, "know that last night meant everything to me." The simple statement, with all it implied about his feelings and fears, nearly undid her composure. "We're going to get through this," she assured him, trying to believe it herself. Blake spotted them as they approached, rising to his feet with a lazy grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Right on time," he called. "I was just telling the boys you might try to run." "Glad to see you're smarter than that." Caleb halted their horses at a safe distance, positioning himself slightly in front of Fiona. "We have what you asked for," he called back. "Show us your hands, all of you, no surprises." Blake gave an exaggerated sigh but motioned for his men to raise their hands, showing they weren't holding weapons, though Fiona noted that guns remained holstered at their hips, easily accessible. "Satisfied?" Blake asked. "Now, about my money." "It's here," Caleb confirmed, patting one of the saddlebags. "More than enough to cover what you claim I owe, but we do this my way. You and your men mount up, ride south for an hour. We'll leave the gold on that flat rock over there." He pointed to a large, flat boulder about 50 yards away. "That gives us time to clear out, gives you what you want." Blake laughed. "That's not how this works, old friend. You bring the gold here now, then maybe if I'm feeling generous I let you and the widow ride away." "That's not going to happen," Caleb replied, his voice steady despite the escalating tension. "The gold for our safety, those are the only terms on offer." Blake's expression hardened. "Always were stubborn, weren't you?" His hand drifted toward his gun. "Thing is, I don't really need your cooperation. 5 guns against 2, and one of you a woman who probably can't hit the broad side of a barn." Fiona felt indignation flare alongside her fear. Before Caleb could respond, she brought her rifle up smoothly, sighting down the barrel at Blake. "My husband taught me to shoot," she said coolly. "I can hit a rabbit at 100 paces. Want to test how accurate I am at this distance?" Surprise and something like reluctant respect flickered across Blake's face. "Feisty one, isn't she?" he remarked to Caleb. "I can see the appeal." "The offer stands," Caleb said, ignoring the taunt. "Take it or leave it." A tense silence fell over the ravine as Blake considered. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. "Fine, we'll do it your way this time." He turned to his men. "Mount up, boys." As the outlaws prepared to ride, Fiona kept her rifle trained on them, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Caleb remained vigilant beside her, watching for any sign of treachery. "1 hour," Blake called as they rode away. "Then we come back for the gold. If it's not there, or if you've tried anything clever, we'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." Only when the riders had disappeared from sight did Fiona lower her rifle, her arms trembling slightly from the sustained tension. Caleb dismounted quickly, helping her down from her horse. "You were magnificent," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "But we need to move fast. I don't trust Blake to keep his word about the hour." Together, they transferred the gold to the flat rock, arranging it visibly but not carelessly. Then they mounted up, ready to ride in the opposite direction. "Wait," Fiona said suddenly. "I have an idea." She explained quickly, and Caleb's eyes widened before a slow smile spread across his face. "Risky," he acknowledged, "but it might just work." 45 minutes later, they watched from a hidden vantage point as Blake and his men returned to the ravine earlier than promised, just as Caleb had predicted. The outlaws approached the flat rock cautiously, weapons drawn. Blake dismounted first, examining the gold with evident satisfaction. "Load it up," he ordered his men. "Then we go after them anyway, no loose ends." The betrayal, while expected, still made Fiona's blood run cold. Beside her, Caleb tensed but remained still, waiting. As the outlaws transferred the gold to their saddlebags, the first rider suddenly jolted upright, clutching his chest. He swayed in the saddle for a moment before toppling to the ground. The others looked around in confusion. No shot had been fired, no attacker was visible. Then a second man doubled over, retching violently. Blake's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. "It's poisoned," he shouted, dropping the coin he had been examining. "They've coated it with something." The remaining men backed away from the gold as if it had transformed into venomous snakes. The one who had been retching now lay on the ground, convulsing. "Hellfire," Blake snarled, kicking at the scattered coins. "Xavier, I know you're watching, this isn't over." But his threats were undercut by the evident panic in his voice and the deteriorating condition of his men. Hastily mounting his horse, Blake abandoned both the gold and his suffering companions, galloping away in the direction they had originally come from. Two of the remaining outlaws followed, leaving their stricken comrades behind. Within moments, the ravine was quiet save for the moans of the poisoned men. "How long will the effect last?" Caleb asked quietly as they watched from their hiding place. "Not long," Fiona replied. "The herb mixture I applied to the coins causes extreme discomfort but isn't lethal. They'll recover in a few hours, though they won't feel like riding for a day or two." Caleb shook his head in amazement. "Remind me never to cross you," he said, only half joking. "Where did you learn about such things?" "My grandmother was known for her herbal remedies," Fiona explained. "Some for healing, others for discouraging unwanted attention. She taught me well." They waited until Blake and the others were well away before cautiously approaching the abandoned gold. The two stricken outlaws were in no condition to offer resistance, lying semi-conscious on the ground. "What about them?" Fiona asked, gesturing to the men Caleb considered. "We'll leave them water and their horses. Once they recover, they'll likely follow their friends." He secured the outlaws' weapons, removing any immediate threat. As for Blake, he'll be halfway to New Mexico by nightfall if he has any sense. Men like him are cowards at heart, they only fight when the odds are overwhelmingly in their favor. They gathered up the gold coins, wiping them clean of the herbal mixture before returning them to their saddlebags. The confrontation had ended more favorably than either had dared hope, though Fiona knew they would need to remain vigilant for some time. As they rode back toward the ranch, the tension of the past 2 days gradually eased, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. The gold, what remained after Blake's payment, represented options neither had possessed before. "We could sell the ranch," Fiona suggested as they traveled. "Start fresh somewhere no one knows us. Oregon, perhaps, or California." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "We could, or we could stay, invest in the ranch, make it profitable again." He glanced at her. "What do you want, Fiona?" The question gave her pause. For so long, her focus had been simply on survival, on holding on to what she and Thomas had built. The idea of actively choosing a future, rather than merely preserving the past, was both liberating and daunting. "I want." She began slowly, sorting through her feelings. "I want to stop being afraid, I want to build something lasting, and I want." She met his eyes. "I want to be with you wherever that might be." The simple declaration brought a smile to his face, not the guarded half-smile she had grown accustomed to, but something open and genuine that transformed his features. "Then that's what we'll do," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. They reached the ranch as dusk was falling, the familiar silhouette of the house a welcome sight after their ordeal. After tending to the horses, they entered the house together, the weight of recent events settling around them like a heavy cloak. Fiona moved mechanically through the routine of preparing a meal, her mind still processing all that had happened. The discovery of the gold, the confrontation with Blake, the uncertain future stretching before them, it was almost too much to comprehend. After they had eaten, she found herself standing at the window, staring out at the darkened landscape. Caleb approached quietly, stopping just behind her. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. "That everything has changed," she replied. 2 months ago I was a wife, then I was a widow. Now I'm—" She trailed off, uncertain how to define herself. "Now you're still Fiona," Caleb said, resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. "Still strong, still determined, just not alone anymore." She turned to face him, studying the man who had so unexpectedly become central to her life. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she confessed. "After Thomas died, I told myself that part of me was finished, that I would go through the rest of my life focused only on survival. And now," Caleb prompted when she fell silent, "now I find myself hoping again, planning again." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Loving again, though it terrifies me. The admission the first time either had used the word love hung between them, fragile and powerful simultaneously. Caleb caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I love you, Fiona, he said simply. Have almost from the beginning, though I fought against it, told myself a man like me had no right to love a woman like you. And what changed your mind? She asked, moving closer to him. You did. Your courage, your resilience. The way you look at me and see not who I was, but who I am now. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him. The way you make me want to be worthy of you. The kiss that followed was different from their first, deeper, more certain, filled with promise rather than question. Fiona felt herself responding with a passion she had thought lost, her body remembering sensations long dormant. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I should go to my room, he murmured, though his arms remained around her. No, Fiona said decisively. Stay with me tonight, I'm tired of being alone. The invitation, with all it implied, brought a flash of heat to his eyes. Are you certain? We don't have to rush. She silenced him with another kiss, her decision made. I'm certain, she whispered against his lips. Life is too unpredictable to waste time hesitating when you know what you want. Later, as they lay together in her bed now, irrevocably, their bed Fiona rested her head on Caleb's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, a night wind had risen, whispering around the eaves of the house like a restless spirit. I should pray, she said suddenly. To thank God for bringing you here for the gold for our safety, but she hesitated, I forgot how. After Thomas died, I couldn't find the words anymore. It felt like speaking into emptiness. Caleb's arms tightened around her. Then I'll do the talking tonight, he said softly, echoing words spoken long ago to a girl in Ohio who had lost her mother. Lord, he began, his deep voice rumbling beneath her ear, thank you for bringing us together, for protecting us, for giving us a second chance at happiness. As he continued, the simple, heartfelt prayer wrapped around Fiona like a blanket, warming places within her that had been cold for too long. She found herself silently adding her own thanks, reconnecting with a faith she had thought abandoned her. When he finished, she raised her head to look at him in the dim light. How did you know what to say? She asked. A smile touched his lips. I've spent a lot of time talking to God over the years, especially when I was trying to leave my old life behind. Turns out he's a good listener, even when you've got a lot to apologize for. Fiona settled back against him, contentment spreading through her like honey. Tell me more about Wyoming, she requested. About the ranch you built there, I want to know everything. As Caleb spoke of his former home, the sprawling pastures, the mountains on the horizon, the cabin he had built with his own hands, Fiona could almost see it. There was pride in his voice when he described the cattle herd he had built, the respect he had earned from neighbors who knew nothing of his past. We could have something like that here, she suggested drowsily, sleep beginning to claim her. Or somewhere new if you prefer. Somewhere no one knows us. Wherever you are is home to me now, he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The rest is just details. The week that followed was one of cautious planning and quiet joy. They decided to keep the ranch, using some of the gold to make much-needed improvements and expand the cattle herd. The rest they secured in a metal lockbox, buried beneath the floorboards in the study and insurance policy against future hardship. Word spread quickly in Trinidad that the widow Parker had taken up with the drifter who had been working her ranch. The gossip was predictably unkind, questioning both Fiona's morals and Caleb's intentions. Let them talk, Fiona said defiantly when Mrs. Abernathy snubbed her openly in the general store. Their good opinion matters less to me than dust in the wind. Caleb, however, was more concerned about the rumors. Your reputation is already beyond salvaging, apparently, she interrupted with a wry smile. Besides, there's a simple solution if propriety is what concerns you. He raised an eyebrow questioningly. Marry me, Fiona said simply. The directness of the proposal, so contrary to tradition, momentarily stunned him. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Aren't I supposed to be the one asking? Probably, she agreed. But I've never been particularly patient when I know what I want. Caleb laughed, pulling her into his arms. Yes, he said, his eyes bright with happiness. Yes, I'll marry you, Fiona Parker. They were wed 2 weeks later in a small ceremony performed by Pastor Miller, who had initially expressed reservations but relented when it became clear the couple would proceed with or without his blessing. Only a handful of guests attended, a few neighbors who had remained friendly despite the gossip, the blacksmith and his wife who had always treated Fiona kindly after Thomas's death. Sheriff Miller made a point of attending as well, though whether out of genuine goodwill or to keep an eye on Caleb remained unclear. During the simple reception that followed, he approached the newlyweds with a guarded expression. Congratulations, he said, shaking Caleb's hand firmly. I hope you intend to make Trinidad your permanent home, Xavier. The implied question and warning was not lost on either of them. Caleb met the sheriff's gaze directly. We do, Sheriff. This is our home now, and we've put down roots. Miller nodded slowly. Glad to hear it. The community needs solid citizens, especially with the railroad bringing more commerce our way. He hesitated before adding, I checked those wanted posters, by the way. Found your name, but the statute of limitations ran out years ago. As far as the law's concerned, you've got a clean slate. The revelation lifted a weight Caleb had carried for years. I appreciate you telling me that, Sheriff. Just see you keep it clean, Miller replied, though his tone had softened slightly. Your wife deserves a peaceful life after what she's been through. As the sheriff moved away, Fiona squeezed Caleb's hand. A clean slate, she repeated. Sounds like a good beginning. The best, he agreed, bending to kiss her lightly, though I suspect the sheriff will be keeping a close eye on us for some time. Let him, Fiona said with a small smile. We have nothing to hide. Well, she amended, thinking of the gold still hidden in their home, almost nothing. The months that followed brought a transformation to the Parker Xavier ranch. With Caleb's expertise and the careful investment of their newfound wealth, the property began to thrive. New cattle were purchased, fences properly maintained, and the barn finally received the new roof it desperately needed. Fiona found herself busier than ever, yet the work no longer felt like a burden to be borne alone. She and Caleb developed a natural rhythm, each complementing the other's strengths, sharing burdens that once would have been overwhelming. By the following spring, signs of new life were everywhere: calves in the pastures, crops sprouting in the fields, wildflowers dotting the prairie. And most miraculous to Fiona, the unmistakable evidence of new life growing within her. A baby, Caleb whispered in awe when she told him, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Our baby. The wonder in his voice matched the feeling in her own heart, a joy she had once believed forever denied to her. Thomas had wanted children so badly, had blamed himself when month after month brought disappointment. Now, against all expectation, she would become a mother after all. Boy or girl, what do you think? She asked as they lay in bed that night, his arm protectively around her. Healthy is all that matters, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though I confess I sometimes picture a little girl with your spirit and determination. Fiona smiled in the darkness, and I imagine a boy with your strength and your gentle heart. My heart wasn't always gentle, he reminded her. It took years and you to make it so. No, she disagreed. The gentleness was always there, just buried beneath necessity and circumstance. I didn't give you anything you didn't already possess. The months of her pregnancy passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. Caleb insisted on hiring help for the ranch work, unwilling to risk Fiona overtaxing herself. She protested at first but eventually conceded the wisdom of the decision, especially as her condition became more advanced. Winter came again, bringing with it the first anniversary of Thomas's death. Fiona visited his grave, her pregnancy now evident beneath her heavy coat. Caleb had offered to accompany her but understood when she asked to go alone. I need to say goodbye properly, she explained. To thank him for the years we had and to tell him I'm happy again. Standing beside the simple headstone, snow swirling around her, Fiona felt a curious peace. The raw grief that had once consumed her had transformed into something gentler, a fond remembrance of a good man who would have wanted her to find joy again. I miss you still, she said aloud to the silent grave. "But I've found a new path, Thomas, a good one. I think you would approve." She rested her hand on her rounded belly. "We're naming the baby Thomas if it's a boy, a way to honor you, to keep your memory alive." The cold eventually drove her back to the waiting buggy, where Caleb had thoughtfully placed heated bricks wrapped in blankets to warm her feet. As they drove home through the winter landscape, Fiona felt as though a chapter had closed properly, not forgotten, but completed, allowing the next to begin. Their son arrived on a bright March morning in 1876, after a long but uncomplicated labor. Fiona gave birth at home, attended by the town's midwife and with Caleb pacing anxiously in the next room. "Thomas Caleb Xavier," she announced when Caleb was finally allowed to enter, cradling the tiny red-faced infant in her arms. "If that suits you." Caleb stared in wonder at his son, tears gathering unashamedly in his eyes. "It's perfect," he managed, his voice choked with emotion. "He's perfect." As he carefully took the swaddled baby from her arms, holding him with a tenderness that made Fiona's heart swell, she watched the two most important people in her world meeting for the first time. The sight filled her with a contentment so complete it was almost pain. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed, exhaustion making her more vulnerable than usual. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over forever." Caleb sat carefully on the edge of the bed, their son cradled in one arm while his free hand found hers. "I know," he said softly. "I felt the same after losing everything in Wyoming, thought maybe happiness wasn't meant for men like me." Young Thomas chose that moment to let out a surprisingly loud cry, making both his parents laugh. "Seems he has something to say about that," Fiona observed, smiling tiredly. "Strong lungs," Caleb agreed proudly. "Strong spirit like his mother." Life settled into a new pattern as they adjusted to parenthood. Little Thomas Tommy, as they began calling him, thrived under their care, growing from a red-faced newborn to a curious, active infant with alarming speed. Fiona found motherhood both more exhausting and more rewarding than she had anticipated, while Caleb took to fatherhood with natural ease. The ranch continued to prosper as well. By Tommy's first birthday, they had expanded their herd significantly and hired 2 permanent hands to help with the increasing workload. Caleb's expertise in cattle breeding was gaining recognition beyond Trinidad, with ranchers from neighboring areas seeking his advice. "We should consider expanding," he suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while Tommy played at their feet. "The Peterson place to the east is for sale. Good grazing land, additional water access." Fiona nodded thoughtfully. "It would be a significant investment, but with the railroad bringing better prices for beef, the timing might be right." She glanced at their son, now attempting to pull himself up using Caleb's leg for support. "And Tommy will need something substantial to inherit one day. Tommy might have siblings to share with by then," Caleb remarked casually, though his eyes held a question when they met hers. Fiona smiled, reaching for his hand. "I would like that," she admitted, "though perhaps we should wait until this one is walking before we think about another." They purchased the Peterson property that summer, nearly doubling the size of their ranch. The expansion brought more work, but also greater security and prosperity. Fiona sometimes marveled at how far they had come in just 2 years, from a desperate widow and a drifter to respected ranchers with a growing family and business. Not that the path had been entirely smooth. Blake and his remaining men had been spotted in the territory once or twice, though they gave Trinidad a wide berth. Sheriff Miller kept Caleb informed of such sightings, a tacit acknowledgement of their shared interest in keeping trouble at bay. "You think they'll ever come back?" Fiona asked after one such report, unconsciously pulling Tommy closer to her. "Not likely," Caleb assured her. "Men like Blake prefer easier targets, and the word is he's found other concerns these days. Rumor has it he's running some kind of smuggling operation down along the Mexican border." Still, they remained vigilant, never taking their safety or happiness for granted. The gold from the cave, their emergency fund, as they thought of it, remained largely untouched, a secret insurance against future hardship. In the autumn of Tommy's second year, they made the journey back to the cave, curious to see if it remained undisturbed. They found the entrance just as they had left it, their small carved marks still visible to those who knew where to look. Inside, the remaining crates of gold waited patiently, a fortune hidden from the world. "What should we do with it?" Caleb asked as they stood in the small chamber, lantern light gleaming off the tarnished coins. "It seems wrong somehow, letting it sit here when it could do good." Fiona considered this, trailing her fingers over the rough wood of the nearest crate. Thomas always said that if he found it, he would use part of it to build a proper school for Trinidad. The town's growing, but the children still learn in that one room building that leaks when it rains. Caleb nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. A school would be a fitting tribute to him, and we could do it anonymously, a mysterious benefactor donating funds to the town council. "The Thomas Parker Memorial School," Fiona suggested softly. "He would have liked that." They left most of the gold undisturbed, but took enough to fund their project. 3 months later, construction began on a new schoolhouse in the center of Trinidad, a solid brick building with large windows, proper desks, and even a small library. The anonymous donor became the subject of much speculation, but Fiona and Caleb kept their secret, enjoying the private satisfaction of watching the community benefit from their gift. By the time the school was completed the following spring, Fiona was expecting their second child. Tommy, now an energetic toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit, regarded her growing belly with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Baby sister," he would announce solemnly, patting Fiona's stomach with small, gentle hands. He had decided, without input from his parents, that the new arrival would be female, and no amount of explaining that it might be a brother instead would dissuade him. "He's got your stubborn streak," Caleb observed with amusement after one such conversation. "And your confidence," Fiona retorted, smiling. "Absolutely certain he's right, evidence be damned." As it happened, Tommy was right. Their daughter arrived in late summer, a tiny bundle with a shock of red gold hair and lungs to rival her brother's. They named her Elizabeth Fiona Eliza for daily use, and Tommy immediately appointed himself her protector, a role he took very seriously despite being barely 3 himself. 2 children, Fiona marveled one evening as they watched Tommy attempting to read a storybook to his infant sister, making up a tale that bore no resemblance to the actual text. "If someone had told me 3 years ago that this would be my life, I would never have believed them." Caleb slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close against his side. "Nor would I have believed I could be this fortunate," he agreed. "A reformed outlaw with a beautiful wife, 2 perfect children, and a thriving ranch. It sounds like a dime novel, not real life." "Perhaps God has a fondness for unlikely stories," Fiona suggested, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Or perhaps he knew what we needed before we did." "Speaking of needs," Caleb said, his tone shifting to something more practical, "I've been thinking about the house. With 2 children now, and possibly more in the future, we're starting to outgrow it." Fiona looked around the small living room, mentally cataloging the limitations of their home. It had been perfectly adequate for a young couple starting out, but with a growing family and increasing prosperity, its shortcomings were becoming apparent. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. "An addition, at least, maybe more." "Expand the kitchen. Add 2 or 3 more bedrooms, a proper dining room." His eyes lit with enthusiasm as he described his vision. "We could incorporate some of the modern conveniences now available, indoor plumbing, perhaps, make life easier for all of us." The project began that fall, transforming their modest homestead into a substantial ranch house befitting a prosperous family. Through the winter, they lived amidst construction dust and the constant sound of hammering, but by spring, the new house emerged spacious, comfortable, yet still maintaining the character of the original home where both had found second chances. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. A severe drought tested their ranching skills, but the diversification Caleb had wisely implemented, adding sheep and expanding their crops, saw them through with minimal losses. Tommy started school in the very building they had secretly funded, thriving in the academic environment and developing a passion for books that surprised both parents. Eliza grew from an infant into a spirited young girl who preferred the barn to the house and could ride almost as soon as she could walk. A third child, another boy they named James, arrived when Tommy was 7 and Eliza 4. Unlike his decisive siblings, Jamie was a thoughtful, quiet child who observed the world carefully before engaging with it. "He has an old soul," their neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez commented once, watching him solemnly examining a butterfly that had landed on his finger. Trinidad grew as well, the railroad bringing increased commerce and new settlers. The rough mining town gradually transformed into a proper community with additional stores, a second church, and even a small hotel to accommodate travelers. Fiona and Caleb became respected figures in this evolving society, their past unconventionality forgotten or forgiven in light of their current standing. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, inviting friends, neighbors, and business associates. The house and grounds were transformed with lanterns, flowers, and long tables laden with food and drink. Music from a hired band filled the air as people danced beneath the stars. Late in the evening, as the celebration continued around them, Caleb drew Fiona away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet spot beneath the old oak tree where they had often sat in those early days. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Xavier," he said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. 10 years deserve something special." Inside was a gold locket, intricately engraved with their initials intertwined. When opened, it revealed tiny portraits of their 3 children on one side and a miniature of Caleb on the other. "It's beautiful," Fiona breathed, touching the delicate piece with reverent fingers. "Open the back," Caleb instructed with a smile. She turned the locket over, discovering a hidden compartment. Inside was a small scrap of paper. Unfolding it carefully, she found a message written in Caleb's strong hand. "To my beloved wife, who taught me how to pray again through her love. Forever yours, C." Tears sprang to Fiona's eyes as she read the words, remembering that night so long ago when she had confessed her inability to pray and he had offered to do the talking. How far they had come since then, how much they had built together from the ruins of their separate pasts. "I love you," she said simply, reaching up to touch his face, still handsome, though now lined with evidence of years spent working under the Colorado sun. "More than I ever thought possible." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm in a gesture that echoed from their earliest days together. "And I love you, Fiona Xavier, every day more than the day before." As they rejoined their guests, moving through the gathering hand in hand, Fiona reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them to this moment. The widow who had forgotten how to pray and the reformed outlaw who had done the talking for her, an unlikely pair drawn together by circumstance, bound by choice, and sustained by love. Later that night, after the guests had departed and their children were asleep, they stood on the porch of their home, watching as the last of the lanterns flickered in the gentle breeze. "Did you ever imagine this?" Fiona asked, gesturing to encompass not just the physical property but the life they had created. "When you rode onto my ranch that day, did you have any idea what would come of it?" Caleb considered the question, his arm warm around her shoulders. "No," he admitted finally. "I was just looking for temporary work, a place to rest before moving on. I never expected." He paused, searching for words, to find home. "Home," Fiona repeated softly, leaning into his embrace. "Yes, that's exactly what we've built, not just a house or a ranch, but a true home." Above them, the vast Colorado sky spread like a canopy of stars, witnessing the quiet contentment of 2 people who had journeyed through loss and danger to find unexpected joy in each other's arms. The path had not been easy, nor was it likely to remain so in the years ahead. But they would walk it together, the widow and the cowboy, partners in all things, forever bound by the night he had done the talking when her faith faltered. And that, Fiona thought as they finally turned to enter their house, hands linked and hearts full, was perhaps the greatest blessing of all.